Just as the priest opened his Bible to officiate what seemed like a perfect wedding, a single bruise hidden beneath her lace sleeve changed everything and stopped the ceremony in its tracks. The church bells chimed softly, echoing through the quaint little chapel nestled in the heart of a picturesque town. Sunlight streamed through stained glass windows, casting kaleidoscopic patterns on the polished wooden pews. Friends and family had gathered to witness what was supposed to be one of the happiest moments of Sarah Miller's life. She stood at the altar, her gown flowing elegantly around her, a delicate veil framing her radiant face. Beside her, James Carter, her fiancé of 2 years, beamed with pride and anticipation. As the organist began playing "Here Comes the Bride," all eyes turned toward the entrance. The priest, Father Michael O'Connell, stood solemnly behind the pulpit, his Bible open before him. He had known Sarah since she was a child. He'd baptized her, counseled her during tough times, and now here she was, ready to embark on a new chapter of her life. But as he looked at her more closely, something about her demeanor seemed off. Her smile didn't quite reach her eyes, and there was an almost imperceptible tremor in her hands as she clutched her bouquet. Father Michael hesitated for just a fraction of a second, but it was enough to plant a seed of doubt in his mind. Still, he pushed forward, determined not to let anything ruin this special day. After all, weddings were meant to celebrate love, commitment, and hope for the future. What could possibly go wrong? The air inside the chapel was thick with anticipation, a palpable energy that seemed to hum softly beneath the surface of every movement and sound. As the organist's fingers danced across the keys, filling the space with the timeless strains of "Here Comes the Bride," all heads turned in unison toward the grand oak doors at the back of the sanctuary. Sarah Miller appeared framed by the doorway, her silhouette glowing almost ethereally against the soft golden lights spilling in from outside. Her gown shimmered like moonlight on water, its intricate lacework catching the sunlight streaming through the stained glass windows above. She looked every bit the picture of a radiant bride, yet something about her presence felt off. Father Michael O'Connell stood at the pulpit, his Bible open before him, his posture steady but his mind racing. He had known Sarah since she was just a little girl tagging along behind her older brothers during Sunday school classes. Over the years, he'd watched her grow into a kind, intelligent woman who radiated warmth and compassion. But today, despite the carefully crafted smile plastered across her face, there was an undercurrent of tension in her demeanor, a stiffness in her shoulders, a hesitancy in her step that Father Michael couldn't ignore. Still, weddings were often nerve-wracking affairs, especially for brides navigating the weight of expectations placed upon them. Perhaps this was simply cold feet manifesting itself in subtle ways. James Carter, standing proudly beside Sarah, appeared utterly at ease. His broad smile exuded confidence, and his eyes sparkled with genuine affection as they met hers. Dressed in a tailored black suit and crisp white shirt, he looked every inch the dashing groom. When Father Michael began speaking, his deep, resonant voice carried effortlessly throughout the chapel, setting the tone for what should have been a joyous occasion. "Dearly beloved," he intoned, "we are gathered here today in the presence of God, and these witnesses to join together this man and this woman in holy matrimony." The ceremony unfolded according to tradition, each word and gesture steeped in centuries of ritual. James recited his vows first, his voice strong and unwavering as he pledged his love, loyalty, and devotion to Sarah. There was no hint of hesitation or doubt in his delivery. It was clear that he believed wholeheartedly in the promises he was making. The congregation murmured approvingly, their expressions softening as they witnessed the sincerity in his words. Even Father Michael found himself momentarily reassured, wondering if perhaps his earlier concerns had been misplaced. But then it was Sarah's turn to speak, and everything shifted. "Sarah," Father Michael prompted gently, turning his attention fully to her now, "do you take this man, James Carter, to be your lawfully wedded husband, to have and to hold, from this day forward, for better or for worse, for richer or poorer, in sickness and in health, Until death do you part. For a fleeting second, Sarah froze. Her lips parted as though she intended to respond immediately, but no sound emerged. Instead, she blinked rapidly, her gaze darting between Father Michael, James, and the sea of faces watching expectantly from the pews. Panic flickered briefly in her wide eyes before she managed to compose herself, forcing a faint smile onto her lips. I do, she whispered finally, her voice so quiet that it barely carried beyond the immediate vicinity of the altar. To most of the guests, Sarah's hesitation might have gone unnoticed, or dismissed as nothing more than pre-wedding jitters. Weddings were emotional events after all, and it wasn't uncommon for nerves to get the better of even the most composed individuals. Yet to Father Michael, who knew Sarah so well, her response felt profoundly unsettling. It wasn't merely the volume of her reply that troubled him. It was the way her hands trembled ever so slightly as she clutched her bouquet, the way her knuckles whitened as though she were gripping it for dear life. And then there was the matter of her eyes. They darted around the room as though searching for an escape route, never quite meeting James's eager gaze. As the ceremony continued, Father Michael found himself unable to shake the nagging sense that something was deeply wrong. He tried to focus on the liturgy, reciting the familiar phrases with practiced ease, but his thoughts kept circling back to Sarah. He studied her closely, noting the way her jaw tightened imperceptibly whenever James reached out to touch her hand, the way her body seemed to shrink inward whenever he leaned closer to whisper something in her ear. These were not the actions of a woman brimming with excitement and joy. They were the actions of someone enduring rather than embracing the moment. Then came the moment when Father Michael noticed something that sent a chill running down his spine. As Sarah adjusted her grip on her bouquet, the sleeve of her gown slipped down just enough to reveal a patch of skin near her wrist. At first glance, it might have gone unnoticed. After all, the lacework of her dress was intricate and ornate, drawing attention away from such minor details. But Father Michael's sharp eyes caught sight of something troubling. A faint bruise marring the otherwise flawless skin beneath the fabric. It was small, barely noticeable, but unmistakably present. A discoloration that spoke volumes about what might lie beneath the polished veneer of this seemingly perfect union. His heart sank as realization dawned. This wasn't just nervousness or cold feet. Whatever was happening here ran far deeper than that. Father Michael's instincts screamed at him to act, to intervene before it was too late. But how could he justify halting the ceremony without concrete evidence? How could he explain to the congregation, and to James, that something as innocuous as a bruised wrist warranted derailing one of the most significant days of their lives? Still, he couldn't ignore what he had seen. Nor could he reconcile the image of the frightened young woman before him with the loving partnership he had envisioned blessing earlier that morning. Something wasn't right, and he owed it to Sarah, not just as her priest, but as someone who cared deeply for her well-being, to find out what was truly going on. With each passing moment, the tension within Father Michael grew. Every word he spoke felt heavier, every gesture more deliberate. He glanced repeatedly at Sarah, hoping for some sign that his fears were unfounded, that the bruise was merely an accident and her behavior nothing more than pre-wedding nerves. But the longer he observed her, the more convinced he became that something sinister lurked beneath the surface. By the time the exchange of rings approached, Father Michael knew he couldn't proceed without addressing the elephant in the room. Whether it meant risking embarrassment, anger, or disbelief from those assembled, he had a responsibility to ensure that Sarah was entering into this marriage willingly and freely. Forcing a calm demeanor, he slowed his pace, deliberately pausing after each sentence to gauge the atmosphere in the room. The congregation remained blissfully unaware of the turmoil brewing behind the scenes, their smiles and nods betraying none of the unease Father Michael felt growing in his chest. And so, as the final moments of the ceremony drew near, Father Michael made a decision. He would not utter the words that would bind Sarah and James together until he was certain, absolutely certain, that doing so was in her best interest. Little did he know This choice would set into motion a chain of events that would change the course of both their lives forever. In hindsight, it was remarkable how quickly the mood of the day shifted, from the hopeful anticipation of a new beginning to the uneasy uncertainty of unresolved truths. What had started as a celebration of love and commitment was fast becoming a reckoning, one that would force everyone involved to confront uncomfortable realities they had long ignored. And while Father Michael didn't yet know exactly what Sarah was hiding, he was determined to uncover the truth, even if it meant stopping the wedding altogether. The weight of Father Michael's decision hung heavy in the air as he closed the Bible with a soft but deliberate thud. The sound reverberated through the chapel, cutting through the ambient hum of whispered conversations and rustling fabric. For a brief moment, time seemed to stand still. Every eye in the congregation turned toward him, confusion rippling across faces that had only moments ago been filled with joyous anticipation. James, standing beside Sarah at the altar, frowned deeply, his brow furrowing as if trying to piece together what was happening. "Father," he asked, his voice tinged with unease, "is everything okay?" Father Michael took a deep breath, his expression calm but resolute. He knew this was not going to be easy, not for Sarah, not for James, and certainly not for him. But it was necessary. "James, Sarah," he said, his tone gentle yet firm, "before we continue, I need to speak with you both privately." His words landed like a stone dropped into a still pond, sending ripples of shock and murmured speculation through the crowd. Gasps could be heard from various corners of the sanctuary as guests exchanged bewildered glances, their minds racing to make sense of the sudden interruption. Sarah visibly stiffened at the priest's request, her already pale complexion turning even whiter. Her hands trembled more noticeably now, clutching her bouquet so tightly that her knuckles were ghostly white. She glanced nervously at James, whose confusion was rapidly giving way to irritation. "What's going on?" James demanded, his voice rising slightly above a whisper, betraying an edge of defensiveness. "Why are we stopping? Is there a problem?" "There may be," Father Michael replied evenly, gesturing toward a small side room adjacent to the sanctuary. "Please, come with me. We'll sort this out." Reluctantly, Sarah followed him, her movements slow and mechanical, as though she were being pulled by an invisible force. Each step she took seemed heavier than the last, her heels clicking softly against the polished wooden floor. James trailed behind, his jaw clenched and his arms crossed tightly over his chest. The tension between them was palpable, thick enough to cut with a knife. As they entered the side room, a modest space adorned with simple wooden furniture and a single window casting slanted beams of light onto the walls, Father Michael closed the door firmly behind them, shutting out the curious eyes and hushed voices of the congregation. Once inside, the atmosphere shifted dramatically. The warmth and formality of the wedding ceremony gave way to something far colder and more intimate. Father Michael turned to face the couple, his gaze steady but compassionate. "Sarah," he began gently, his voice low and measured, "can you tell me what's really going on? Are you happy here? Truly?" For a long moment, silence filled the room. Sarah stared at the floor, her lips pressed into a thin line as tears welled up in her eyes. It was clear she was struggling internally, torn between the desire to speak and the fear of what might happen if she did. Finally, she stammered, I don't know what you mean." Father Michael sighed heavily, his heart breaking for the young woman before him. He had known Sarah since she was a child, had watched her grow into a bright, compassionate soul who deserved nothing less than unconditional love and respect. What he saw now was a shadow of that person, a frightened, broken version of herself. "Sarah," he said softly, taking a step closer to her, "you're like a daughter to me. I can see that something is weighing heavily on your heart. Please, trust me." Tears spilled down Sarah's cheeks as she finally broke down, her composure crumbling under the weight of unspoken truths. "It's not what it seems," she admitted, her voice cracking with emotion. "James, he's been pressuring me, controlling me. I didn't want to say anything because I thought I could fix it, but her words trailed off, choked by sobs that racked her body. James' face flushed red with anger and disbelief. "What are you talking about, Sarah?" he exclaimed, his voice rising sharply. "We love each other. This is our day. You can't ruin it like this." "No, James," Sarah shot back, her voice gaining strength despite her tears. "You don't get to twist this anymore. You've manipulated me into this wedding, and I can't do it anymore. I won't." Her declaration hung in the air, sharp and final, leaving no room for argument. Father Michael stepped between them, his presence commanding yet calming. "James," he said firmly, leveling a piercing gaze at the groom, "this isn't love. Love doesn't control or coerce. It uplifts and supports. If you truly care for Sarah, you'll respect her decision today." James opened his mouth to protest, but the words died on his lips. The truth of Sarah's confession, and the evidence of her distress, was undeniable. Defeated, he stormed out of the room, slamming the door behind him with such force that the walls seemed to shake. The sound echoed ominously, underscoring the gravity of the moment. Back in the sanctuary, the congregation buzzed with whispered speculation, their earlier excitement replaced by concern and confusion. Some guests leaned forward in their seats, straining to catch snippets of conversation from the side room. Others sat rigidly, exchanging worried glances. Mothers clutched their children close, while fathers muttered under their breath about the unexpected turn of events. Despite the chaos, one thing was clear: something monumental had just occurred, and its repercussions would ripple far beyond the confines of the chapel. Inside the side room, Sarah collapsed into a chair, her body trembling with a mixture of relief and exhaustion. Father Michael knelt beside her, placing a reassuring hand on her shoulder. "You've done the right thing," he told her softly, his voice filled with compassion. "This isn't the end. It's the beginning of finding your true freedom." As Sarah wiped away her tears, a flicker of resolve began to replace the fear in her eyes. Though the road ahead would undoubtedly be challenging, she felt, for the first time in months, a glimmer of hope. With Father Michael's guidance and the support of her loved ones, she knew she could rebuild her life, a life free from manipulation and fear. And as for the wedding that never happened, it became a powerful reminder that sometimes stopping a union is the first step toward discovering real love and happiness. The aftermath of the halted wedding unfolded like a storm that had been brewing for years, finally breaking with a force that left everyone reeling. For Sarah, the immediate hours following the intervention were a whirlwind of emotions: relief, fear, shame, and eventually, a fragile sense of empowerment. As she emerged from the side room with Father Michael by her side, the congregation sat in stunned silence. The once celebratory atmosphere of the chapel had transformed into something heavy and somber, charged with unspoken questions and suppressed whispers. Some guests shifted uncomfortably in their seats, while others openly stared at Sarah, their expressions ranging from sympathy to disbelief. Father Michael addressed the crowd briefly but firmly, offering a vague explanation without delving too deeply into personal details. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began, his voice steady despite the weight of the moment, "we must remember that love is not just about celebration. It's also about truth and respect. Today we've witnessed an act of courage, and I ask you all to support Sarah as she begins this new chapter of her life." His words carried both authority and compassion, serving as a reminder that what mattered most was Sarah's well-being, not the spectacle of an interrupted ceremony. As the congregation slowly dispersed, some lingered to offer quiet words of encouragement to Sarah, while others slipped away quietly, unsure how to process what they had witnessed. Her family, however, rallied around her immediately. Her mother embraced her tightly, tears streaming down her face as she murmured apologies for not seeing the signs sooner. Her father, usually stoic and reserved, placed a protective arm around her shoulders, vowing to stand by her no matter what. It was clear that Sarah's revelation had shaken them to their core, forcing them to confront their own complicity in ignoring the subtle indicators of trouble that had likely been present for months or even years. In the days that followed, Sarah retreated temporarily from public life, seeking solace in the safety of her childhood home. Surrounded by familiar comforts and the unwavering support of her loved ones, she began the painstaking process of unpacking the layers of manipulation and control that had defined her relationship with James. With Father Michael's guidance, she started attending counseling sessions, where she learned to identify the patterns of emotional abuse she had endured and to rebuild her self-worth. Each session was difficult, dredging up painful memories and moments of doubt, but they also brought clarity and strength. Slowly but surely, Sarah began to reclaim pieces of herself that she had long thought lost. Meanwhile, news of the aborted wedding spread quickly through the small town, becoming the subject of hushed conversations over coffee and dinner tables. Opinions were divided. Some praised Sarah for having the courage to walk away from a toxic situation, while others whispered behind closed doors, questioning why she hadn't spoken up sooner or whether she had somehow provoked James's behavior. Social media amplified the gossip, with anonymous posts speculating wildly about what had really happened. Despite the noise, Sarah chose to focus on her healing rather than engage with the outside world. She knew that the opinions of strangers didn't define her worth, and that the people who truly mattered stood firmly by her side. James, on the other hand, struggled to cope with the fallout. Initially, he tried to salvage his reputation, reaching out to mutual friends and acquaintances to paint himself as the victim of a misunderstanding. But when confronted with undeniable evidence of his controlling behavior, including messages and accounts from others who had witnessed his possessiveness firsthand, he found himself increasingly isolated. Many of his former allies distanced themselves, unwilling to associate with someone whose actions contradicted the values they held dear. Over time, James disappeared from the social circles he had once dominated, retreating into obscurity as the community moved on without him. For Sarah, the journey toward healing was neither quick nor easy. There were nights when fear crept back in, haunting her dreams and making it hard to sleep. Days when self-doubt whispered insidious lies, telling her she wasn't strong enough to start over. Yet through it all, she reminded herself of the moment she had chosen to speak up, the moment she had said no to a life that would have suffocated her spirit. That memory became her anchor, grounding her whenever the waves of uncertainty threatened to pull her under. With time, Sarah began to rediscover the passions and interests she had abandoned during her relationship with James. She reconnected with old friends, joined a local book club, and even volunteered at the same church where her wedding had been interrupted. These small acts of reclamation helped her regain a sense of agency and purpose, reminding her that she was more than the sum of her past experiences. By leaning into her faith and surrounding herself with positive influences, she found a renewed sense of hope, not just for herself, but for the possibility of finding genuine love in the future. The story of the wedding that never happened became a powerful testament to the importance of speaking one's truth, even when it feels impossible. In sermons and community gatherings, Father Michael often referenced the event, without naming names, as an example of how love should always be rooted in freedom, trust, and mutual respect. He encouraged those listening to pay attention to the signs of unhealthy relationships, both in their own lives and in the lives of others, emphasizing that true love does not demand sacrifice at the expense of one's dignity or autonomy. Ultimately, Sarah emerged from the ordeal stronger and wiser, her spirit tempered by adversity but unbroken. Though the road ahead remained uncertain, she faced it with a quiet confidence born of knowing she had survived the worst and come out on the other side. And while the scars of her experience would always remain, a faint bruise beneath her sleeve, a lingering hesitation in certain situations, they served as reminders of her resilience, proof that she had the power to rewrite her story. In the end, the wedding that never took place became far more meaningful than any vows exchanged at an altar. It was a declaration of independence, a triumph of truth over fear, and a beacon of hope for anyone who dared to believe that love, in its purest form, could still exist, if only they had the courage to seek it.